Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to welcome everyone to this second annual Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and Canada Long List Zoom party. It's a mouthful. My name is Lori Feathers, and I'm the chair and founder of the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the United States and Canada. I want to welcome all of the small publishers joining us, the authors and translators who are joining us from all around the globe, literally, and all of the readers of great literature who have decided to spend their evening, or in some cases, middle of the night with us. Before we talk about the long-listed publishers and their books, I want to tell you a bit about the Republic of Consciousness Prize. The prize was founded in 2017 in the UK by writer and publisher Neil Griffiths, with the aim of supporting small presses for their ongoing commitment to work of high literary merit. From the start of the prize, it has followed the philosophy of sharing each year's prize fund across multiple presses. This is our second year administering the prize in the United States and Canada. We couldn't be more proud of the great submissions that we received from our vibrant small publisher communities on this side of the Atlantic. And we are especially proud of the long list that we will be talking about tonight. As was the case last year, we will be awarding a total of $35,000 this year, and each of our 10 long-listed publishers will receive $2,000 each. Further funds will be distributed to our publishers, authors, and translators who advance to the shortlist, which will be announced March 5th, with the winner to be announced on March 19th. In keeping with tradition of the UK prize and our first year here in the United States and Canada, the winning publisher will receive no additional money, just the glory of being hailed the winner of the 2023 prize. Last year's winner was a public space for its publication of the short story collection, God's Children Are Little Broken Things by Arinze Ifeanyi. The Republic of Consciousness Prize relies on the support of readers. Please support us on social media, follow our website, republicofconsciousnessprize-usa.com. And if you are able, go there to donate. The prize fund each year relies 100% on donations from the public. And now let me introduce my co-host tonight, my fellow 2023 judges. James Crossley, recently manager of Madison Books in Seattle, and now about to open Leviathan Bookstore in St. Louis. ZOE Grams, founder and curator of Upstart and Crow, a literary studio in Vancouver, Canada. Amanda QASSAR, bookseller at Warwick's in La Jolla, California. And Paul Wilson, co-host of the Books podcast, Mooks and the Grapes, who lives in Colorado. And now let's get started with our program. I'm proud to introduce our first long-listed publisher of the evening, And Other Stories. Founded in the UK in 2010, with a growing presence in North America and wide distribution of its books throughout the United States and Canada. We're joined tonight by publisher and founder Stefan Tobler to talk about And Other Stories submission, Your Love Is Not Good. Welcome, Stefan.
Thanks for having us on the long list. And I should say that Johanna was really hoping to be here, but they have been previewing a new album of material and were put on a flight today. That was when they were given their flight. And so they were very sad and wanted to pass on their regrets to everyone that they couldn't be here tonight.
Stefan, I wondered if you wanted to get us started by reading a short passage from the book, since Johanna is not here today.
I will. There's Johanna. Well, I don't know, it's a bit too dark to see.
She's all in black.
Yeah. So here it was. Here's a passage which introduces us to the person the narrator becomes obsessed with. It also starts with the words "the twin," which was originally going to be the name of the novel. The twin appeared in summer at a party in Silver Lake. I noticed her hair first, which was tall and messy, like a pile of wire on top of her head, because I was wearing mine like that. Summer nights in Los Angeles. The hosts were 3 men and 1 woman. The guys thin and sleek as otters in short shorts, shirts made into tank tops with ragged holes sagging to their elbows, and the woman ghostly in something translucent and puffy. At first, I thought the elaborate black bustier under the film of her blouse was a scoliosis brace. Basil and mint plants grew, or tried to, in cracked pots on the long, narrow patio, and everyone smoked. I was talking about Tarkovsky to a man whose name was Amadeo. He had long, thick eyelashes, like swipes of magic marker, coming off his eyelids. We flirted. He told me his name meant loved by God. So does mine, I said, drunk. Another man approached us, handing a beer to Amadeo. I'm Anton, he said. We began to speak about heartbreak. Anton was in LA to recuperate from a bad breakup. To demonstrate his sensitivity, he scratched my name into his forearm, where it swelled into wormy lines. You see, he said, I'm a romantic. It was then that the twin wandered into the frame, to my right, beneath an orange tree, with that tall hair. Both Anton and Amadeo turned to look, and it wasn't long before they left me to talk to her. And then skipping forward a bit. After Amadeo and Anton wandered off to talk to the twin that first night, I drifted away to get a new drink and find a cigarette. I wished for drugs, but was too lazy to commit to earning them. I got caught talking to some people who had been on the same MFA program as me. We gossiped. Someone put on a dance record and the night got later. I heard a woman squeal to a man, "Baby, I'm dancing." He responded, "I can see that." The patio roasted in a dark orange light, crowded with gaunt nocturnal creatures, eel-like bodies twitching together in groups, collapsed on couches with their wrists flicked up towards the night. I'd like to read more, but I think we'll probably stop it there for you.
Okay, thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions. First, Stefan, I wanted to just talk about some of the themes that are raised in the book. In particular, interesting questions about the relationship between the artist narrator and her female muses. Particularly, it's really provocative, I think, to think about how Johanna explores these muses and how they serve to reify the artist's identity in some cases, but also in some ways negate it. And given kind of this theme that kind of filters throughout the book, which is such a great subject of a literary book, you know, muses and artists and the gaze, I wanted to ask you, in what ways you think Your Love Is Not Good is a great fit for your catalog?
I mean, that was a really lovely introduction to the book, and I think it, yeah, as far as how it fits our catalog, I mean, it's I guess we just fell in love with the joy in the, you know, in the storytelling that comes across, mixed with the intelligence and the nuance in how it looks at, you know, quite big topics to do with art world and activism and identity, and the way it sort of treaded a lot of different terrains with real, yes, with a real sort of light touch and taking you in interesting directions. I don't know. I mean, we just like the book.
It's understandable. The book's fantastic. I understand that there is a quite interesting story having to do with star charts as to how you came about acquiring this.
Well, I mean, well, it is true that when we were hoping to acquire the book, before we could acquire the book, Johanna required Jeremy Davies, who at the time was a US editor and is now at Coffee House, and myself to give our dates and places of birth, so that Johanna could do quite detailed star charts on us and see if we would be compatible as a publisher and editor. And somehow I think the star charts came out pretty wonky, but somehow Johanna thought there was enough compatibility that it would be all right.
Well, it seemed to have worked out all right. Thank you for talking to us about this book, and please give our regards to Johanna. We wish she could have joined us tonight, and I can't wait to hear that album.
Yeah, I'll pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to my fellow judge, James Crossley, to talk to City Lights Books.
Thanks, Lori. I am the first long-listed title that I'm here to talk to you about is Lojman from City Lights Books, written by Turkish author Ebru Ojen and translated by Celine Gökçesu and Aron Aji, who is here with us today. One of my favorite kinds of books to recommend in stores because it's so challenging to do so. Describing it makes it sound kind of horrific. There's a lot of unpleasantness, on the superficial plot level, yet it's an incredibly compelling book that I couldn't put on. All I could say about it to people is that, trust me, it's really, really good. Aron, maybe you could give us a brief excerpt, example of what we're talking about, maybe?
I would be very happy to, but we thought Celine would be a better fit. So I think Celine is here. Celine?
I am here, yes.
There
Okay.
she is.
And I will say that was a very nice pronunciation of my last name. I'm going to start with just from the beginning, and I'm going to try to stop at the 3.3-minute mark. Among the lakes, the desire to grow into oceans. Silence, endlessly growing silence. The deep mountain craters. Lake One stretching infinitely toward the yellow horizon, resisting change with its every drop, asserting its presence, vast and still in tiny vibrations. Unlike those lakes that long ago surrendered to the desire to merge with other bodies of water, Lake One streamed forth from dark desert caves, implacable and whole, spreading out like a mercury spill to merge with the horizon, suffusing the plains in its steam, holding the mallards, the lightning strikes, and the people in place. The smell of sulfur wafts up from the soil, filling the air with an acrid mist from Mount Suphan to Lake One, permeating the present. Green-headed and mottled mallards take wing from dry reed beds and fly toward the valley near the village. Here they are again. Their feet brush the snowbanks on the plains. As the golden ring of the noon hour splits the sky in two, the mallards beat their wings on the horizon line and ascend among the dark clouds. For them, the village is an unfavorable destination. If at all possible, it is best to avoid the villagers altogether. The reed beds, the small hills are much safer. In fact, the villagers don't bother with these latecomers to the landscape, these ducks who steal into the valley in rows. Overcome by the routines of their daily lives, The people simply deal with the Argesh Plateau as harsh and desolate as an Arctic desert. They burn dry cowpats in their ovens and stoves, air out their barns, dig out their watts of herb cheese, cook meals with the provisions left over from summertime. With detached industry, they live long lives in the triangle formed by Mount Suphan, Lake Van, and the Argesh Plateau. Into those lives, they fit reunions, separations, weddings, suicides, funerals, births, and murders. While life forever runs its course down below, the mallards in search of rest change their itinerary that usually extends from Iran to Russia. They glide from the Argesh Plateau to Chaldiran to spend the night among the reed beds in hot springs. They feed on insects and moss in misty nooks. And in the morning, they reappear over Lake Van as they descend to the plains. By day, they beat their wings. By night, they inhale the sulfur. But mallards, just like humans, are subject to the senseless operations of happenstance. A momentary carelessness or inexperience can mean death in the span of a wing beat. A stroll on the frozen lake can cause the ice to suddenly crack. We cannot trust winter. Nature, though it allows for happy accidents, insists on disasters. If we're not attentive, it can easily bury our supposedly meaningful lives into history, like so much of nothing. When the burial is complete, the important life we once lived holds no meaning. We and everything we failed to make meaningful disappear in these unexpected encounters. The encounters, the missteps, the detours are constant. We're not. There's a time for everything. In nature's orchestra, the rhythm of wing beats, the breath, the nature's melody must create their own harmony. If the mallard fails to take flight at the right moment and flounders, then its downy breast and webbed feet, wet from the hot springs, will become inescapably stuck on the icy surface. As planets revolve in their galaxies with poetic rhythm, the motionless duck will surrender its body to the earth, as if settling on a new migratory path. And so here it is, another agonizing scene exalted before our eyes. Such scenes are always full of pain and heartbreak, and their beauty at its core belongs to nature's nightmarish darkness. And I'll stop here.
That was beautiful and portentous. Although mallards are not featured on every page of the book, they certainly are important. There's some imagery later on that just bears with me and makes me really, made me really understand why the cover is the way it is. So definitely everyone read far enough to get to that at least. A question to start off with for either you, Celine, or Aaron, or both. Was there any consideration given to translating the title, which is a Turkish word that I doubt many of us in English, in the Anglophone world, are familiar with?
I mean, there was a lot of thought. I will say, I'll let Aaron say more on this. For me, lojman is such a foreign and awkward word in Turkish that although I was not necessarily the one who decided to keep this title, I was very glad that we ended up keeping the original because it preserves, it's not a Turkish word, it's borrowed, I think, from French, and it sort of captures its awkwardness in a way in English as well, just by keeping it. I felt like that was a good decision.
I want to just add that Elaine Katzenberger was very kind to allow us to, influence also the cover design. And the idea was to actually force the potential reader to a double take. The cover is incredibly compelling. the mallard eye there. The colors are very, very, sharp and, it's almost magnetic, I find. And yet the word logement is a very alienating, strange word. And we really wanted that sort of unsettled entrance to the book, because as you said, James, the book is at once something that no one that I know has been able to put down when reading, and at the same time, a trying book, a book that really expects a lot from the reader. And one last thing about logement, the word in Turkish always alienates. When my classmates would say that they live in a logement, these are government provided houses, there will always be a sense of humiliation. And those who hear the word would, in fact, feel, some kind of compassion mixed with pity. And so we thought that just as Turkish kept that word in its original logement, we should keep it that way.
Well, that all makes a lot of sense now. You mentioned the difficulty of the material, the situation in which the characters find themselves is sort of universally recognizable as a kind of existential, drama. But are there, certainly there are, but could you expand a little bit on any specific geographical or cultural contexts for their situation that might not be as apparent to North American readers?
Sure, I think one needs to remember, and in fact, I think the book very, very clear, as every chapter begins with a reference to the setting. The setting becomes almost like one of the main characters throughout the book. And this is a very forbidding setting. It stays snowed under for almost 6 months. And indeed, it's a very isolating space. And the government provided teacher's house where all of this is happening, the whole story is happening, is itself, a space of entrapment, outside which there isn't much of an escape. Probably, readers notice that the main character and family are Kurdish. And so inevitably, it becomes a grand metaphor for the way the Kurdish citizens have been held, if you will, in this, sort of tentative space, if you will, inside the Turkish society. They are accommodated, but they are not included. So, maybe Celine can add further to that.
I think for me, the subtlest aspect of it, or it's something that might come across as more subtle to the North American reader, like Aaron mentioned, is that this family is Kurdish. So there is indeed something very symbolic about both their entrapment and this government assigned housing. There's also an element of choicelessness because you don't get to choose your logement, which, plays into the whole symbolic nature of, not only are they a family that are alienated from their own society by being sent out to a small village where they're not from, but also they are alienated within a space that they didn't choose. And then add to that the level of the snow and the forbidding mountain and the lake and the geographic entrapment. So it both, captures the alienation of the individual, which is, I think, more Eru's focus. She's definitely more focused on the person and each character, but it also is more effective and touching when you also take it in within the context of Kurds as a minority and also individuals within the Turkish society, where like when you are a minority, I feel like your individuality ends up more in the background because people approach you with your minority status. And I feel like, you know, all those themes slowly unfold and play out as the plot does.
Well, thank you very, very much for those excellent explanations and for bringing us the book in the first place into English. Yeah, really enjoyed reading it. Next, I think we have Paul, who is going to share with us our next long-listed title.
Yeah, thank you, James. Hey, everybody. So it is my honor to be able to introduce a book that I absolutely loved, as you can tell by all the tabs here, which is The Sorrows of Others by Ada Zhang, which comes to us from A Public Space, which is an independent nonprofit publisher founded in 2006. And joining us today, we have the author, Ada Zhang, as well as the founding editor, Bridget Hughes. So I'd like to, first of all, invite Ada, would you mind reading a short passage from the book for us?
I do not mind. It would be an honor. Yeah, thank you, Lori, for gathering all of us, and it's nice to see you again. I had the honor of meeting Lori in Dallas, which was really exciting. I'm going to read from a story titled Knowing, and I'm just going to read 1.5 pages. So, we were not connected by blood. He was my mother's best friend's father, and though I never readily recall this detail, his wife had just died, prompting him to leave China and move in with his daughter in America. I was told to call him Yeye, grandfather. Downpours throughout Texas that summer beat a century-old record and ended the drought that had lasted nearly a decade. The rain came in its variations every week, biting drizzles, slanted thunderstorms, fat drops that hit the ground a few at a time, then all at once. It kept me away from my friends and stuck inside with no one to play with except my little brother. The lake had risen 6 inches so far and would rise 8 more before the summer was over. Until the rain stopped in August, temperatures never reached above 82. Hot, but nothing compared to what we were used to, a heat so oppressive that radios would overheat and shut off, the view in the distance breaking and bending, as though the whole world had gone up in flames. What about Sir or Mr.? I asked my mother, scratching a fresh mosquito bite on my leg. I had met my grandparents on my father's side only once in China and was too young to remember it. The other side, I'd been told, had been dead since before I was born. This person was a stranger to me. The afternoon was just dipping into evening. We were hanging our clothes to dry in the backyard, glad that the heat wasn't intolerable. Gusts of moist air cooled our sweat and gave the clothes we'd hung a dreadful liveliness, pants and shirt swaying like dismembered body parts. In front of the clothesline, my mother squinted at me. Tiny goldfish appeared under her eyes, their tails fanning out from the corners to reinforce the symmetry that made her face beautiful and terrifying. I handed her a damp t-shirt from the basket, one of Benny's. Looking away from me, my mother shook it out just once, with such force that the crack, a clean and empty sound, made me jump. You will call him Yeye, she said, and clipped the shirt onto the line. Still squinting, she stepped back and examined her work. That is the Chinese way. She turned to me, using her hand as a visor. The shadow divided her face diagonally, one half light, one half dark. Thank you.
It's beautiful, thank you. So I'll start, my first question I'll ask you since you're with us here. So your collection reminded me in many ways of maybe like Zhu Lahiri or somebody like that, both in the beauty of the writing, but also your ability to put readers into the shoes of a wide variety of characters, you know, whose backgrounds maybe don't necessarily reflect those of some of the people who are reading the books. So I was just wondering, could you talk a little bit about your decision to focus your stories on immigrants and other outsiders and people who might be viewed, you know, within society as an outsider?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, to me, I was writing from the inside. And so I wanted, my hope was to tell the stories that way too, from the inside. So these people are outsiders to other people in their worlds. Often they're outsiders, even to people they're close to. Sometimes they're very strange. But I wanted to center that you know, that strangeness, and wanted to write from inside of it. So hopefully, you know, the inner lives of these outsiders would come through. And so, yeah, I think that's what I was going for.
Yeah, well, I would say mission accomplished, absolutely. And I was also so impressed by your ability to, you know, cover characters across a wide span of ages, backgrounds. And yeah, so you did an absolutely wonderful job of making that believable and compelling. So thank you very much. My other question, I was going to ask if Bridget is around, which I believe she is. Hey there. So
Hi.
On your website, you know, it says the mission of your press is to, quote, seek overlooked and unclassifiable work and to publish writing from beyond established confines. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that idea in reference to The Sorrows of Others, and more specifically, what some people might consider taking a bit of a risk on a short story collection from a debut writer.
That's a great question. Thank you, Paul. And I just want to echo Ada and say thank you to Lori and to everyone who's here tonight for this chance to gather together with all of you. Well, I guess it's been our mission for so long to celebrate short stories that it didn't for a moment for us feel like a risk. I think that we are also in sort of a glorious moment for the short story. And so Ada's stories, her story first came to us as a piece that was submitted to the magazine. And then when she had a collection that was sent to us too. And I guess what drew us to the story was both the sense that she was interested in themes that I think we have sort of returned to over and over in the magazine, and also that it felt like stories that we had not yet published, that they were in some way entirely new to us. And so we leapt at the chance to work with Ada and to publish the stories. And it's a thrill to get her. I haven't heard her read her stories for a while now, so I'm happy to get the chance to sort of be immersed in that world again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking if I had to pick a story out of that collection to read from, I'd be hard pressed to pick one because I loved all of them equally. So yeah, well, thank you so much. That was a great answer. So next, I think we're going to turn it over to ZOE GRAMS and Two Lines Press.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you tonight. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the submission from Two Lines Press, which is Cross Stitch by Jazmina Barrera. It's translated by Christina McSweeney. And I'm thrilled that Jazmina and Christina are here along with Michael Holtman representing Two Lines Press. And I think my blur may not help with the cover, but it's beautiful. Maybe thank you, Michael, rescuing me there, and Amanda. Oh, good. We've got many of them on screen. I wonder if we could begin. Jazmina, would you mind reading a short passage from the book?
Thank you, Zoe. And please let me just say that this is such an amazing award. It's such an honor to be here listening to these beautiful texts. I think Christina is actually going to read the first paragraph and I'll read the second.
It was around noon when I got into the shower. The damp patch on the bathroom ceiling was spreading, making the paint peel and feeding a colony of fungi, initially green and then red like a moldy tortilla. During the first year and a half of my daughter's life, I used to let things like that just happen. too weary and overworked to worry about them. But now they're beginning to irritate me. I walked naked into the bedroom, chose some clothes, but before I had time to dress, I heard my cell phone vibrating. The screen showed a Facebook message from Valentina Flores. It took me a moment to remember that she was Citlali's aunt. I'm devastated, Mila, dear. My heart breaks every time I write this. Citlali had an accident. She drowned in the sea in Senegal. We're bringing her ashes back. I'm so sorry, Mila. She adored you, and I know you adored her. My head hurt like I'd been punched in the face, like someone was trying to suck my brains out through my eyes. I don't know how long I sat there on the bed, hugging my towel, trying to cry silently so my daughter and Andres wouldn't hear. Brief, painful images flashed across my mind, one after another, like bats in a cave. Citlali's face, her lips blue, her arms battling against the current, her open mouth swallowing salt water, her body floating amid strands of seaweed, spume, and plastic bottles. All this mingled with the laughter and shrill voice of my daughter. She was singing and dancing with her father to an album by the Breeders. My damp hair was dripping down my neck. It was hard to breathe. Over to you, Jazmina.
The Spanish verb bordar is derived from the Indo-European bar, meaning point, bristle, hole. This, in turn, has an etymological association with the Latin fastus, from which we get fastuoso and fastidio, lavish and annoyance. In both Spanish and English, the verb has a common root in the Old French bruder, meaning the side of a boat, as in starboard. And this is how it relates to embroidery, which was used to decorate the edges of fabrics. The 10th century Anglo-Saxon Exeter book contains an ambiguous extract. Faeme adhire bordan gerisep. The ambiguity lies in that bordan can mean table, embroidery, or as above, edge. One possible translation is, a woman's place is at her embroidery. A looser translation might be, a woman's place is on the edge of the abyss. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a beautiful excerpts, and I think for those who haven't read the book yet, a really a way into this intimate and powerful and deeply cultural book too. Congratulations on the exceptional reception that the book has had already. I think perhaps part of that is due to the compassion, Jazmina, that you write these young women characters with, and this sort of much needed and overdue exploration of young womanhood and womanhood in general. Tying in with the excerpt that you just read, could you tell us a little bit more about the sort of misperceptions and the joys of both womanhood and cross-stitch, and when you decided to knit the two together to create this novel?
Thank you, Zoe. You're very generous. And this book has two different beginnings in my mind. The first was many years ago when they invited me to write an essay for a congress, a young writers congress, and I wrote something about embroidery and sewing and the silence of women. And many years after that, I started writing a novel about 3 friends. And at the beginning, it was very rooted in my own experience as an adolescent and the community of friends I had. So I started rereading my journals and letters, and that's where I remembered how important embroidery had been for us back then. I kept on embroidering. It was something that I started when I was a small kid, and then it became a part of my life. But I remembered how important it had been, not just for me, but for my group of friends back then. And I went back to that essay and I started writing both things at the same time, the essay and the novel, until I found a way to embroider them together. I think of this novel as a quilt that has these fragments about embroidery in literature, in culture, in medicine, in some of the many possibilities that embroidery offer us, and all of the different themes and topics that it touches upon, such as feminism, art, so many things. It's just a complete universe, and I wanted to give a sample of that together with the story of these friends.
Thank you so much, and I love the analogy of the quilt, because I mean there's so many different themes and ideas and facets to the book, and yet it comes together as one. So I'll remember that. Jazmina and Christina, I understand that you both knew each other before this translation process, that you're friends. And Jazmina, I believe that in one interview, you sort of described the translation process as part of an ongoing conversation. And so I'd love to hear from you both about how that ongoing conversation changed the translation process from previous experiences and what that was like for you both.
Shall I start? So yes, we have known each other, sort of for a few years before we actually became author and translator. And our friendship has been long distance, so it has been writing, and writing whole emails that very often as we've come to work together, it's mixing the personal with the translation. I think the two things get joined together. For me, it's I like to have contact with the authors that I'm working with. And so, sort of, I think if you can build up that kind of relationship of respect and friendship, it feeds into a translation. So it's not that unusual a process for me, but what do you think, Jazmina?
Yeah, I think it, as Christina says, this has been a part of our conversation, and we translated 2 books together before this one, and I feel like the difference with this one is that it had more dialogue. And well, because this is the first novel we translate together, the previous 2 were essays. And this is not only dialogue, but it's a lot of adolescent dialogue. So, and adolescent from the 90s in Mexico City. So we had many wonderful conversations trying to find the tone for these dialogues and the voice of these girls, I think. And that was very interesting. I think it was a new challenge, and I really enjoyed just watching Christina perform her magic.
And I enjoyed becoming a teenager again for the time it took.
Well, Jazmina and Christina and Michael, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for this submission. I'm going to pass it along to Amanda QASSAR and $2 Radio.
Hello, the submission from $2 Radio is Landscapes by Christine Lai. And I believe tonight we have Brett and Eric from $2 Radio. as well as Christine. And Landscapes is an incredible debut, set in a near future where, as near futures often are, besieged by ecological collapse. And yet it's also this beautiful exploration of art and preservation. I would love to hear Christine read a bit for us today.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for, to all the judges. It's really such an honor to be here. So I'll just read from the start of the book. 1st of September. I picture myself standing in the midst of a ruin. All around me, there are mildew canvases, rolled up crudely or crammed into drawers. The edges of the papers, mouse-eaten or worm-eaten, fall into heaps of dust. As I work through the disorderly archive and chip away at the mountain of responsibilities, my mind is drawn back to this image of Turner's studio, left in a state of Pompeii-like destruction after the painter's death. That same atmosphere of decay permeates the library in which I spend my mornings. On better days, disorder is forestalled, and there is only the linearity of the catalog and the neat collection of books and objects. On days of anxiety, such as today, I find myself stranded in the wreckage. The dust that has gathered in the corners, the moldy papers, the shelves that bend under the weight of books and archival boxes, all these seem to be advancing toward me, millimeter by millimeter, until they overwhelm me. 2nd of September. A calmer start to the day. A thin column of sunlight shines down from above. Elsewhere, the library's underground storage space is illumined by a solar power lamp that is recharged daily on the desiccated lawn. I write by the light of this lamp, and a pile of books serves as my desk. Before I sat down to write, I spent some time admiring the flowers I keep in secret. The earthquake 5 years ago resulted in an irreparable crack down one wall of the library. The plants have forced their way through the fissure and have begun to sprout in the space where books were once stored. Even now, as aridness eats through the outside world, the weeds and flowers that flourished in the aftermath of disaster are protected by the shadows and nourished by the water from the broken pipe. I have not told anyone about this pipe, as it will be fixed immediately, depriving the flowers of their sole source of water. This spot of green is the only place where I allow water to drip away unchecked. These flowers, the only luxury I permit myself to keep in these days of want and longing. I'll stop there.
So beautiful. You do so many things that I love in a novel. Not only is it this awesome archival epistolary form, which is great, you also reference real works of art so evocatively that I felt compelled as I was reading to go look at them and learn more about them. And I just love that. Can you tell us more about how you decided which works of art to include in the book? Did you already have them sort of curated in some form before you set out to start writing the book?
I already had the Turner, so I've always been, I'm really fascinated by Turner's works, and I worked on his works in graduate school, so I wanted to kind of bring Turner into the book, and then from Turner I kind of went on to other artists and painters. There was a lot of selecting, so obviously I couldn't include everything I wanted to write on. So I ended up kind of choosing works of art that address the representation of women and sexual violence. So that kind of limited the kind of artwork that I was able to include. And I love ekphrastic writing, and I actually find it incredibly difficult. So that was a challenge I set myself, to just sit with these artworks, images of the artworks. Some of these paintings and sculptures I've seen in person, but I wasn't really able to revisit them because of the pandemic. So I just sat with the images on my screen every day and just tried to kind of think about how they could be tied into the narrative. Yeah.
Did you always know it would be this epistolary form?
From very early on. It wasn't like the very, very first draft. So the very first draft was more kind of traditional third person narrative, but then I felt like something was missing. So then I tried the first person diary form, and then something just clicked and it worked. So I stuck with that.
It's wonderful. I have a question for our friends at $2 Radio about the book itself as this beautiful object. I think that our designer is here tonight. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about how you designed this extraordinary book? I associate $2 Radio with just design you don't see anywhere else. And this cover especially, I think, is rather extraordinary. So I would love to hear more about how you went about designing it.
Wow, I mean, thank you for recognizing that about the design in general. And then also just thank you everyone for recognizing Christine's work too. We're just so grateful and tickled. In terms of the design, I guess the way that we start with every project is by asking the author for other designs that they appreciate, artwork, anything like that. And then try to align it with our sort of like design sensibilities or aesthetic. And with Christine, it was tricky. Like you mentioned, there's so many pieces of art that are mentioned in the book, which was a lot of fun to look up. But then there were some that, didn't exist that were, so, we went down a rabbit hole trying to find, these Turner paintings that might not have necessarily even existed, which was fun too. But yeah, I guess like we were trying to capture something that was kind of moody and tonal, that aligned with the book. And Christine seems to be very visual as well, and so it was definitely like a collaborative process with Christine, and throwing out some other references for us, and then just trying to make it coherent to a package book.
And the person spectating, the person looking at the art too, is just perfect.
The I don't know how they're standing there too. I just love that, where they're kind of like almost like looking down too, and not even like at the artwork that's right in front of them. So that was pretty special to find that picture.
Very, very well done. Thank you so much for this. I can't say enough how extraordinary a debut this book is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think I'm passing it back over to Zoe.
Yes, and with that, I am thrilled to introduce another book that may be blurry, The Birthday Party. This is, oh, maybe someone else can hold it on the screen. Sorry about that. Thank you, Amanda. This is the submission from Transit Books, The Birthday Party by Laurent Mauvignier. And I'm really thrilled to welcome Adam Levy from Transit Books, and also the translator of the book, Daniell, Levin, Becker. So thank you both for being with us tonight. I don't think Laurent is with us, but we're thrilled to have you. And I wonder if we could begin with a short reading from the book.
Sure, I'll do that unless Adam, you'd prefer to.
No, it's fine to go ahead.
Can pretty much just open to any page at random and read a really compelling and very long paragraph. So I'll open to, and it's with infinite care, almost ponderously, that he takes the time to dry himself, to brush his teeth, to comb his hair, to tend to his eyebrow hairs that are wriggling every which way, and then to cut the few hairs in his nose, an infinite seriousness to get dressed in his black pants and a white shirt. Even if he hesitates before putting it on, he might get it dirty if he wears it right away. Just as he considers putting on a tie, then no, that's too much. That would be grotesque. A jacket would be ridiculous too. Should he wear an undershirt? He considers this, a tank top if he doesn't wear a jacket. He imagines it would be visible through the shirt. So he stays in front of the armoire looking for the inspiration that surely won't ever come to him for this sort of thing. He'll just have to take the plunge. He's not about to go over to Christine's to ask what he should wear, is he? He decides to try on the pants and the shirt to see if he feels uncomfortable, if he feels restricted in that shirt, which he can clearly see won't hide his belly spilling out of his pants. He's put on more weight since last time. Shit, he thinks, not great. But should he leave the shirt tucked into the pants or leave it out, play it casual? After some reflection, he leaves it tucked in. Too bad if it's a bit tight, it's fine. He undresses so as not to risk getting dirty. In any case, he also has to remember to bring in the cows. He'll get dressed at the last minute, and for now he'll get back into his jeans that are a little too loose, his checkered shirt and his half-zip sweater with the holes in the elbows. He'll have plenty of time to figure it out later, and time to change his mind if it's not right.
Thank you so much, Daniell. I'd love to ask a question about your work as a translator, but before I do, Adam, I'd be you as publisher of the book. For those who haven't read it yet, essentially a 40th birthday is being planned in a family in rural France, and things go very, very awry and sort of turn nightmarish. And Adam, the book is so many things. It's a page turner. It sort of reads like a thriller, and it's also a deeply philosophical exploration of our internal worlds and relationships. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more from your perspective, the ways in which Laurent sort of circumvents traditional genre expectations, and to what extent did that make you want to publish the book? You know, what excites you most about this work?
That's a really good question. Can you hear me actually?
Yeah.
Sorry, my headphones are kicking into gear. It's a really good question. The first time, I guess I encountered the book two ways. First, with a reader report, which kind of had this teasing opening line that described the book as like, what if Virginia Woolf were to write a psychological thriller? And then I started, which I think does already kind of set up the expectation for that subversion of genre. And I went back and I read an earlier book of his, The Wound, which came out maybe 15 years or so ago, which really moves in with a very similar kind of cadence. It's much less violent than this book, but it does have that same. It even centers a birthday party, and it even centers another central feature of this book. So I don't know to what extent Laurent seems to just be drawn to this theme, but both of them kind of, you can feel this coil tightening in the prose, and it definitely feels like he's taking a genre and exploding it in some way, allowing it to live in this kind of like hyper real sense of a present, allowing that from that moment to also move back into the past, from one consciousness to the next. And I think that's really what drew us to it. And I've seen variations on that kind of that, like these kind of disparate comparisons, like a Proustian noir, or some kind of thing that takes this really slow, drawn out cadence of the prose and kind of smashes it with the other elements of genre that I think he really does very well. I mean, like I was so anxious editing this book. I've never felt that way while working on a text before. But I think that's also an incredible testament to Daniell's work on it and what he was able to achieve, really, to be able to have you move through these sentences with that tension just ratcheting up without losing you in these long meandering sentences or paragraphs or pages.
Proustian noir, I think that's genius. I sort of want to create a whole category on the bookshelf.
Yeah.
start now, just for Proustier Noir.
Yeah.
And thank you, Adam. And it's a perfect segue to asking a question of you, Daniel. And just while I have the mic, I guess want to go off script for a second and say what a pleasure it is from my perspective that we have so many books on this list that are works of translated fiction, and just sort of celebrate the magicianhood of translators in bringing these books to us, and of course authors and publishers who make it happen. So here's to the translators, and so Daniel, you know, as I think it was clear from the excerpt that you read, Laurent's prose is incredibly rhythmic, and there's a really sort of conscious tempo to it. And I'd love to know a little bit about your process of sort of retaining that musicality while also really ensuring that the subtleties of the text continue within English. So tell us a little bit about your alchemic process in that.
Thank you. That's a very generous way of queuing up the question. I think I don't want to take too much credit because in a way what Mauvignier does, it's all there, you know, it's very thought out, and the rhythm, he doesn't do a lot of wordplay. You know, I sort of took a break from translating other projects that were very wordplay intensive, and was relieved that this one was so straightforward on that level. But rhythmically and on the level of these really long sentences that can sometimes digress for several pages and then come snap back to a thought that you sort of almost lost track of and you have to go searching for, but he never lets you stray for too long. It's always just within reach. Just tracking those things, I think he really did such a good job of timing and sequencing and orchestrating the intrusions of these thoughts and these digressions that, you know, I don't want to undersell the work of the translator and say all I had to do was put it in English, but the cues were really present. Like I didn't feel like I had to add any sort of traffic cop work. What was more of a challenge, I would say, was there's a texture to his prose in this book that is sort of contradictory because it's at once very propulsive. It's very much a page turner. You can read it really compulsively and just want to know what happens next. You can skate through these very dense and forbidding looking blocks of text very quickly. But when you stop to pay attention to a sentence at the level of the phrase, quite a lot most readers, I think, won't do this. Most readers will just be happy to skate along, but somebody like a translator whose job is to pore over really the way every sentence is constructed, there are a lot of moments where you're like, why would he phrase it that way? That's not quite right. That's not quite idiomatic. There's something a little jagged or a little pebbly about this prose. And so it's a really compelling tension for me. And I think he would have a really interesting reason as to why he went about doing it that way. I didn't get too far into trying to speculate on why he did. I just, you know, that was my job, was to sort of keep these sentences that are a little bit askew in very subtle ways and replicate that in a way that doesn't keep you from being able to read it really quickly as a page turner. But if you stop and pay attention, the way information is delivered within a sentence might be out of conventional order, or he might just sort of omit one detail in somebody. At one point, a character picks up a pack of cigarettes, picks up a lighter, and then throws the lighter away. And you never know whether or not she actually lights the cigarette. I think that was actually, I tried to keep my questions to the author relatively few, but that was one I was just like, does she light the cigarette? She lights the cigarette. So kind of maintaining that tightrope walk between a very tense and sometimes jagged texture to the prose, and yet the story being so fluid, so readable, so kind of inevitable in the way it's driving you towards this conclusion. That was really the process for me.
absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Adam and Daniel, thank you for joining us tonight, and please pass on our congratulations and gratitude to Laurent for this truly remarkable and very original book. And now I'm going to pass it along, I think, to James and the Dorothy team.
Thank you, Zoe. I am especially happy to be introducing the folks from Dorothy, a publishing project. Theirs was one of the first books that I read for this year's award, and it was immediately clear that I couldn't imagine there were going to be 10 books that were more interesting to me than this one. So I knew right away that it was going to be on my long list at any rate, and I was glad that so many of the other judges agreed with me about that. And I'm not biased in saying that, even though Dorothy is based here in St. Louis, as am I. I think this is a book that will be read many, many years from now. There's so much richness in it. So I'm hoping we can get someone from Dorothy to hop on and maybe share some of Kate Briggs' work with us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, James, so much. Kate couldn't be here. She was very sorry. She wanted us to say that she thought the whole organization, the prize, is so wonderful, and she was so honored to be on the list with these particular books and authors and translators and presses. So thank you all for recognizing her work. And yeah, it's super hard to pick something to read from this book. If you've read it, you know that it moves in and out of different modes, and reading one little piece of it feels like, I don't know, it almost feels, it's just hard to pick. So I'm actually just going to read the first page and a half. And I also feel like I have to say that the book feels completely right in Kate's voice, which is British. And also she's a very slow, calm person. And I feel like it's just very wrong that I'm reading it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So the beginning of each new project was always a continuation. For the time being, it was the basic but not obvious project of sleep. A co-project involving Helen and her baby, starting out from where they were first thing in the morning, carrying forward the experience of their long and wakeful interactive night. Helen, tall in proportion to the room, her hair hanging heavily, heating her neck. The baby, wide open, shifting and lively in her arms. Spread out over the floor was a playmat, a thick square divided into 4 distinct sections. Its colors were a bit faded from the sun, from the heavy rounds it must have done in someone else's washing machine. Its spaces looked touched, well-mouthed, its closer textures more or less exhaustively pre-explored. Even so, like the light show enclosed in a molded plastic star, the all-in-ones they'd received handed down, along with the mat, in a large format bag for life, to Helen and the baby, it was all new. Weirdly, relentlessly, startlingly new. Underfoot, the mat made the thin carpet soft. Already, it changed the whole inhabitation of the room. One of the mat's zones looked agricultural. Satin crops of different shades of green furrowed with dark brown artificial fur. Helen wanted to rest her head in that patched field. She was tired. We could sleep there, she thought. She looked down. The baby's head was a weighted sphere, warm and solid in the crook of her arm. The rest of her fidgety and light. The baby lifted her chin, gazed back up. Helen loosened the idea from her own head and offered it out, smiling and nodding with it, floating it like a proposition to the baby. She let the baby's gaze range intently around the edges of her face. Then, on second thought, tugged her idea back in. Actually, I decide. She looked up, away, and restated this firmly to herself. I decide. And I say, we lie there and go to sleep.
Thank you so much for that, Danielle. Even though you're not British, I thought you did a great job. I'm glad you said what you did about how an excerpt doesn't really capture the fullness of the book, because it is so innovative, I think, in its form. I mean, not only does it sort of elevate motherhood and the domestic sphere to, you know, an important subject for literary fiction, even an epic worthy subject for fiction. It is sui generis almost in terms of what it is. I mean, I've been thinking of it as like an intellectual picaresque or critical fiction. You know, it is both a commentary on its own self and other work. At the same time, it's telling you a story, which I really, really enjoyed. But my first question isn't really anything quite as heady as that. It's really kind of a comment that I think this book is probably as long as a half decade's worth of all of your other books published together.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
How did that happen?
Yeah, it's our thickest book by like 3 times. How did it happen? It came that way.
The book was so good.
Yeah.
But we had to use smaller, thinner paper.
Yeah, it was actually like a problem because our format is our trim size is so strange. We were really worried the spine would break if we let it get too much longer. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the paper and how long the spine could actually get. I mean, that's probably like a silly worry, but it was our worry. But no, I mean, the book came to us from Fitzgeraldo, and we were already, I saw in the chat, I was already a huge fan of Kate's book, This Little Art. And so as soon as they approached us with it, we were like, oh my gosh, we have to make this work, like size be damned. And actually over the years, like we've like some thicker books have crept in like after the first, 7-8 years of Dorothy. So there was some precedent.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned her other book because and Zoe mentioned this too. I was personally pleased to see a number of translations make our long list. And although this book is not a translation is obviously very important to Kate and to her work. And I wonder if you might be able to comment on that aspect of it at all.
The translation aspect?
Or translation?
I guess not just translation.
I mean, the way that
language.
Language.
Okay,
Right.
the
Those
way that
things are so
the
important.
thing that immediately comes to mind is that Kate is the translator of Roland Barthes, and that seems very significant. She actually sees this book as being in conversation, more than in conversation with This Little Art. She sees them, even though this book is fiction and that is not. She has been very clear that she sees them as being sort of almost ecliptic. Yeah. But she's, she's kind of a Barthes translator, and I think that the way that she approaches the world is not really as a philosopher, but like Barthes as a reader. I always tell my students Barthes wasn't really a philosopher so much as he was like sort of the consummate reader. He could read anything, and I think that Kate's gifts fall in that domain as well. Mm-hmm. She's able to, in this book, I mean, it spans, it's just in one day, and very quiet in its way, but it's just constantly reading every texture of the world around her, I mean the character. Thanks.
That's very well put. I feel like I understand Barthes now, which I don't know that I ever have before, so that's great. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for bringing in this book. It was really a privilege to be able to read it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to see everyone too.
Yeah. We'll kick it over to Paul to introduce us to our next long listed title.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I am very excited to introduce one of my favorite presses, Charco Press, and their entry for the long list is Two Sherpas by Sebastián Martinez Daniell. And I'm so glad, first of all, that we're giving some love to the translators. Here's another translated book, and to the designers, because I think that Charco always does a great job of producing beautiful books, and this is another example of one of those. So joining us today from Charco Press, I know we have Sebastián here, and I know that we also have Sam McDowell, who is the co-founder of Charco, and I believe we also have Jennifer Croft here, the translator. Is that right? Well, at the very least, I know we have Sebastián here, so I will ask him if he wouldn't mind reading a short excerpt to kick us off.
Hi. Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to thank for the invitation and for the work of Republic of Consciousness organizers and workers. It is a deep pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. When someone is writing his things in a place like this, with this awful agua marina door behind me, I never dreamt that I'd be someday surrounded by all these talented publishers and translators and authors. I could try to read the first 3 chapters. As you can hear, on your own risk, my kind of English is a very particular kind of torture on the language of you, but I will try. 1, 2 Sherpas peer into the abyss, eyes scoring the nadir, bodies outstretched across the rock, hands gripping the precipice edge. They seem to be expecting something, but not anxiously. Instead, with a repertoire of serene gestures that balance between resignation and doubt. 2, one of the Sherpas gets distracted for a minute. He's young, he's still a teenager. Nonetheless, he has already summited twice. The first time when he was 15, the second a few months ago. This young Sherpa doesn't wish to spend his life on Everest. He's saving up to study abroad, in Dhaka perhaps, or in Delhi. He's made some inquiries about enrolling in statistics, but now, as his gaze focuses and empties out over the topographic hollowness, he fantasized that his vocation could be naval engineering. He likes boats. He's never been in one. It doesn't matter. He's fascinated by floating. Who isn't? Who doesn't envy the jellyfish and its drift across the open sea? That sensation of going with a flow. That subtle, phosphorescent, unfurling, devoid of vanity. Let the currents take care of the rest. To float, to disentangle yourself from the curse of history, not to bear that cross. A morality without excesses, without guilt, blindness and bioluminescence, tentacular electricity that discloses the dark of the ocean at night. 3, the other Sherpa first trotted the slopes of Everest 5 weeks after he turned 33. He had arrived in Nepal 6 years before, with well-toned muscles but not advanced knowledge about mountaineer. Some previous experience, yes, but disjointed, lacking a structure of a specific training. Since his baptism as a Sherpa, he's attempted to reach the summit 4 times. On none of those occasions, he had made it to the top. Not necessarily through any fault of his own, or not always. But this recurring deferral explains to some extent why his next gestures go a little further, beyond doubt and into irritation. Tourists thinks the old Sherpa, who isn't old or properly speaking a Sherpa. They always manage to do something, these people, these tourists, he thinks. Then says, with an ambiguous gesture, he indicates the void, the ledge where the body of an Englishman lies prone and immobile, and he says, these people. And so he breaks the silence, if the deafening noise of the wind rubbing over the ridges of the Himalayas can be considered silence.
Thank you. No, that was beautiful. And that was a great selection to read because it does such a perfect job of encapsulating one of the things that I loved about this book, which was that fragmentary and almost like a circular structure where you manage to break it into pieces, but then you weave them back together and it forms like this rhythm and this pattern that is absolutely compelling. So I was hoping you might be able to just share with us a little bit about the way that you came to that style or that approach to the book and your reasons for writing it that way.
Yes, it was a very long process. I was writing this book for about 8 years, and it has many other forms and structure before it reaches its actual form, definitive form. Recently, I think it was Daniell mentioned this expression, this English expression that is a page turner. I think this book is a disruptive page turner because you never know what it will come next. You turn the page and you can meet Shakespeare, you can meet the childhood of the young Sherpa, you can meet some philosophical derogation of the older Sherpa about colonialism or exploitation. You can find something about impressionist painters or whatever. So I was trying to embrace a lot of different themes and subjects in the book. So I was really challenging by on how to find a structure, a narrative structure that could join or gather all these different approach to the same scene from so many different points of view. I think it's a kind of polyedric novel. It has 5 or 6 different phases, and finally I decided to try to put all these phases in a very mixed up way, so you can go in your reading, you can go jumping from one to another, and I think that keeps the reader awake, you can say, alert, instead of try to unfold just one of the phases in many pages or 50 pages about the same point with the same point of view or the same central theme. I don't know if it works out like I was projecting it, but it was funny for me to find this final structure.
Yeah, well, for what it's worth, I think it worked very well. Like you said, it was such an interesting blend of a page turner that is still broken into all these chunks with, the geology of the mountains and Shakespeare and these personal stories, but I thought you did a wonderful job of weaving it together. And I really enjoyed what you said about the idea of turning the page and you just have no idea what would be next. So yeah, I think it worked very well. So my next question was originally going to be if Sam and Jennifer are around. I'm not sure. I'll give them one more chance to chime in. Not sure.
Okay, found it.
Okay, well, I can kind of just tweak it then for you, Sebastian. And my question was about the idea of the partnership between the press, the translator, and the author. And I enjoy watching from afar and kind of seeing these relationships develop. Charco and Jennifer Croft have worked together many times. And I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about the process of working both with Charco and with Jennifer specifically around this book and how that all came about and how it went.
First, I want to say that I myself work in an independent publishing house here in Buenos Aires called Entropy. So I always have some kind of empathy with the publishers that works with me when they are on the other side, when I am on the other side, when I am the author and not the publisher. And the story, the particular story of this book has so much to do with Jennifer. I knew Carolina from before to Sherpas because our mutual work as publishers, she in Edinburgh and me in Buenos Aires, but she never read me. I have 2 previous novels published before to Sherpas. And she knew I was a publisher here in Buenos Aires, but she didn't knew me as an author. And it was Jennifer who made the contact, this particular contact for the publishing of Two Sherpas in English. Jennifer lived in Buenos Aires for many years. She translated a couple of novels of a couple of friends of mine, Romina Paula for a novel called August for the Feminist Press, and Federico Falco, Perfect Symmetry for Charco Press, and was Jennifer the one who one day met the Spanish version of Two Sherpas, and immediately she wrote to Jennifer, to Carolina, to invite her to read the book and consider the possibility of publishing it in Charco. And luckily, she liked it, and here we are.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, go ahead.
I always say that my gratitude to Jennifer is huge and eternal, because the translation process of this book was it ran parallel to her pregnancy. So in fact, she told me that she sent the final version of her translation 2 days before she delivered the baby, two babies, not one, 2 babies at once. So just to hear that she go through that vital and transcendental experience with my book in her hand was just infinitely moving for me. So to know that Jennifer was expecting for her 2 babies and at the same time trying to translate in his marvelous way the words that I wrote was that I will be always in debt with her.
Yeah, oh, that's beautiful. Wonderful praise for translators, for mothers, which tie into the long form and many other books on our phrase. So yeah, that's a perfect transition. Thank you very much. And again, I loved your book. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Laurie, and thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. All right, well, now I think I'm going to turn it back over to Laurie and Biblioasis.
Hey guys, we're in the home stretch now. So I'm really happy to introduce the submission of Canadian publisher Biblioasis, Breaking and Entering by Don Gillmor. We're joined this evening by founder and publisher of Biblioasis, based in Windsor, Ontario, Dan Wells, and also Don Gillmor, the author. And Don, I wanted to see whether you might read us a short passage.
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you for including me on this long list. It's a great honor, and I'm so grateful that someone's creating new prizes, because I think we're losing them in Canada. So it's good that someone's replacing them. And I'd just like to read from the prologue. At night, the street regained its innocence, everything still and stored away. A few lights were on, mostly for security, the people asleep, the air heavy and unmoving. The sound of air conditioning units, wheezing, struggling, a symphony. A few cats moving languidly. The line of cars, dark and foreign. There were so few lawns now. Everyone had prairie grass or Japanese maples or a juga, straw-colored and dry. Once inside, you saw the furniture, the incomplete set of dishes, the big screen. In the basements were discarded toys and the faint smell of mold. The third floor is abandoned, impossible to keep cool in this weather. The shoes lined up near the door, always more than anyone could practically use. The keys in a ceramic bowl they'd brought back from Seville or Istanbul. Coats for every kind of weather except what they had right now lined up on hooks, waiting for fall. On the refrigerator, reminders and clever quotes held by magnetic bumblebees. On the calendars, days circled in red. A week of half-read newspapers. Who has the time? Inside, the cupboards were well-intentioned juicers and panini makers, idle for a year. But you needed to look farther than that. Into the drawers that held vibrating toys, into the hard drives that held plans and bank accounts and fetishes, into closets containing expensive dresses bought on sale and never worn. Revealing journals and medical histories and old love letters tied quaintly with string. Finally, you had to look into those sleeping heads, thoughts of adultery, wayward urges, unnamed panic, standing naked in front of the school assembly again, trying to fly but having some trouble, pursued by something lumbering and dangerous, the fear of poverty, of failure, the future, afraid for their vulnerable children and their suddenly vulnerable parents. And the pragmatic nagging, did I turn off the stove? You did. And finally, a longing that was impossible to name, an ache that starts in your heart and spreads, waves of something, a heavy feeling that brings tears, a mix of nostalgia and sadness and unmoored memories floating just out of reach. Every house held this, but you only took what was valuable. That was the key. Thank you.
That was wonderful, and a really great setup for my question to you, Dawn. And it's about your protagonist, Beatrice Billings. I kind of think of her as a middle-aged every woman. But she's a middle-aged every woman who also becomes a break-in artist, picking the locks of other people's homes to peer into their private lives. For B, this is a solace and an escape from her daily life. I wanted to ask, how did you first come about the idea of lock picking as a response to midlife dissatisfaction?
Well, I had a short story that I'd written years earlier, and it was a young man who broke into houses, and he had a partner who thought he was going off every morning to work in a security company, and instead he was breaking in. And I went and looked at that story and thought, you know, this could be something longer. This could be a novel. And I started with him, and then I just didn't think it was working with him as the protagonist. And I thought, what if it was a middle-aged woman? And I'd been talking to female friends, you know, back when I was closer to 50, and they would talk about this idea of invisibility. You know, you turn 50 and you're suddenly invisible. And I thought, what about combining these two and having a 50-year-old woman who, partly it's a midlife crisis, and she's, you know, embracing it in a, you know, very unique and specific adventure. But part of it is this idea that she can actually walk into houses, you know, that people won't even notice she's breaking in because she's so invisible.
Yeah, she's invisible, and I guess trying to see what's invisible about other people's lives too. It makes for a really intriguing story. My next question is for you, Dan. I wanted to know when you first came to know Dawn's work and what your initial thoughts were when you read Breaking and Entering.
I came to know Dawn's work through Breaking and Entering. Really, I mean, I knew of him as a history writer, and I'd not read him as a fiction writer before the manuscript was sent to me by his agent. And I was captivated right from the prologue, right from that voice, and from Bay's voice, and from Dawn's humor. I was captivated by the very real desperation that I thought that this book captured. You know, I mean, often we're spending a lot of time you know, late at night when we can't sleep, or at least I am. This is sort of an admission, creeping around on Facebook to see what our friends, from 30 years are up to. And here's somebody doing in the real world what most of us do, at night stealthily. And you can learn a lot about what people are really like when you're standing where they don't expect you to be. And I was really captivated by this quest of Bae's and where it takes her. I thought it was very, this is an increasingly desperate age, and I thought this novel really captured that sensibility.
Yes, it does, and it also there's a lot of climate themes in the book too, which also captures the stress and the anxieties of this age, and it's a wonderful book. I want to thank you both for bringing it to us. Dawn, of course, for writing it, and Dan for submitting it. It's been a wonderful addition to our reading. So thank you both.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for selecting it, and to all the judges. You guys are among my favorite readers, but this group of publishers is pretty special to be among you. So thank you all.
I'm going to now hand it back to Amanda to talk to Grey Wolf.
The mission from Grey Wolf Press, a wonderful nonprofit from Minneapolis, is The Box. And tonight we are joined by Carmen from Grey Wolf Press and by Mandy Suzanne Wong, the author of this uncanny book. The Box is set in an unnamed city, and in the beginning we see this small white box fall from someone's coat pocket into the snow, and are taken on a journey through the life of this box through the eyes of many different narrators. When I finished this book, I wanted to turn it right over and read it again, which is not something that happens to me often these days after reading so many books. Mandy, you did a really cool interview with Electric Lit, in which an artist took a short discussion of the box and created an artwork around it. I'm going to put that in the chat, and also would love to hear a selection from the book.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you so much for reading it. It's really amazing, especially for someone from my very tiny country in the middle of the ocean, to share space with so many wonderful literary professionals. It's a very unique opportunity for me. So I'm grateful to you judges and to Grey Wolf and everyone who engages with my work. This is half a sentence from the first chapter of The Box. You'd think such a being as I, having witnessed what appeared to be a paper thing falling litter-like into the snow from the pocket of some human's coat, would, in accordance with my character and circumstances, have run away and left the thing where it had fallen. Only that thing, a paper thing, white paper in the snow, exerted counterforces which I cannot define, but which prove stronger than history and all my instincts. The little white box fit in the palm of my hand, with perhaps a whisper of a rattle when it moved, was of a size that could have accommodated cigarettes or playing cards, a wallet or slim wad of cash, yet was absolutely self-contained, lacking the door or flap of the cigarette or playing card carton. But then again, it was the opposite of self-contained, being all over seams, by which I mean it was constructed of paper strips, entangled as if haphazardly, shooting out as if dynamically between one another and diving under one another in all directions. But so tight a weave it was that no strip seemed to have an end. Delicate as they were, the strips held fast to one another with a tension that resulted in an impenetrable rectangle, for neither fingernail nor toothpick nor so much as a breath could have wriggled underneath those seams, and not a one would yield to pulling or prying. Of that I was certain, when I turned over the curio in my mittens, a curiosity of kinetic rectangular perfection, a hypnotizing snarl of gaps with all the vulnerability of paper in the snow. And the devil of it was, it belonged to someone else, the nervous man who dropped it before my very eyes, which fact alone made it a complicated, daunting thing. I might have kept it for myself, taken it off somewhere, although this notion did not appeal, for there was something about the object which was as repellent to me as it was attractive. I might have pretended I hadn't seen it and dropped it back onto the sidewalk, let someone else chance upon it or crush it. Or I might have tossed it in a dumpster or beneath a car, or done any number of things. Thank you.
Okay, I was saying, totally hypnotic. In this interview with Electric Lit, you said, something not the box is the point of the box. The box is a recalcitrant thing. So I have a seemingly basic question, but of course it's probably not. Can you speak a bit to how you came to the symbolic object of a box as a vehicle for this book? Was it inspired by a certain box?
Sure. Absolutely. But it didn't have to be a box when I started. I really just wanted to challenge myself and see if I could create a novel of which the story engine and the spark and the protagonist, the thing that drives the plot, was an inanimate object. And because all inanimate objects are recalcitrant to some extent, we don't know what's completely going on with anything, a hairbrush or a USB cable or whatever, we don't know them completely. I wanted to have the object that was to be my protagonist be visibly recalcitrant, so to speak, be like visibly arcane, and also to compel the reader to want to know more about it, but be unable to. And a box is the thing that, just came to me for that, because when you come upon a box, you immediately wonder what's inside. And so that's what makes you want to interact with it, the possibility of whatever might be in it. But this particular box sort of thwarts all attempts, or most attempts, to try and get into it. And yeah, so it wasn't a particular box, but the possibility and the power that boxes exert over us just by being what they are.
One of my favorite things about the book was actually the afterword, in which you acknowledge this list of writers and philosophers and scientists who were misquoted and misinterpreted in this book. So this is, I think, a sort of a dual question for you and for Carmen, if Carmen wants to come on. It seems like it's a given that a fiction writer need not acknowledge that they may not be adhering to a strict truth, but perhaps that's not the case. So why did you decide to acknowledge that you took those liberties with these truths, in quotes? And I wonder too what Carmen thought of this afterword as well.
Thank you so much for that. Considerable number of people seem to actually read that. I never thought anybody would actually read that, but I felt like I had to do it because of the level of influence that the authors in the list, and there were several whom I left off by accident, the level to which they influenced my language in the creation of this book. Take, for instance, like Andrei Platonov and Clarice Lispector, and on all the authors in translation that are on that list, like what their work does to English in translation changes English from within and really makes it seep out of itself a bit. And experiencing that and reading those authors was so influential to me. It really, you'll notice that all the voices in the box are different. Each section has a different narrator, and each narrator is a foreigner relative to the dominant tones and syntactical structures of contemporary English. And that both weakens English and opens up its opportunities to explore more of its potential. And so it was really important to me to acknowledge where that desire to do that came from, and from the sheer variety of languages, that it was. But I didn't want to write, oh, I'm inspired by Saudi Arabian Arabic. I wanted to write, I'm inspired by this person in translation. I'm inspired by Platonov's Russian in translation, not just Russian, Yeah, so that's where that came from.
Does Carmen want to say anything about
I mean, I do think that we talk a lot about living in the age of misinformation, but we live in the age of ubiquitous information. And I think we're finding novels moving in the direction of including a lot of extensive nonfiction elements to them. And I see this book speaking to that impulse, the level of detail and our sense of like what detail means is often in, I mean, when I was a child, we had the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that was the universe for me. And now we have, that, a gazillion fold. And it's such an exciting source of material. But I think too, information itself, like the box, is part of the Anthropocene. It's the material, it's the waste, it's the excess that exceeds the human and will outlive the human. And I think that that's a big part of the book's energy and propulsion, is how it's not even about decentering humanity, because humans are such a big part of it. It's reestablishing the fact that we coexist with information and with the boxes and everything the boxes contain and bring to us, and that we put into them. Which is why I adore this book. And also the sentences are just so gorgeous. I feel like someone mentioned Virginia Woolf. There's just this elegant modernist sensibility to them, to the sentences. There's a crispness, there's an acuity that I love. So that's unrelated to your question, but I just had to do my fangirl, because I came on to the press. The book had been acquired. I read it in manuscript, and I just thought, yes, I've come home. This is the kind of book that I want to be a part of bringing into the world.
It's unlike anything I've ever read, and I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to read it in this forum. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, it's time to wrap this wonderful program up. I am just so inspired by all of the amazing talent in this Zoom room. Some of my favorite people, some of my favorite publishers, and just people that love books, and really, I think, are doing what is important for all of us as readers, and that is providing us with not just books that are gonna sell a bazillion copies, but books that are great, books that matter, books that make us want to read and love what we do for a living and what we do in the world. And I'm just so grateful to all of you. It's so inspiring. And I've been a fan of small presses for quite a while now, and I can't imagine not continuing until the day I die, because I really believe in what you all do. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank our wonderful judges. Such a very thoughtful and lively group to read with, and for all the care and dedication that you each gave to each of these submissions that we received. And we had to consider, and it was hard sometimes because there are many more that we didn't talk about tonight that were great submissions too. So thank you. And thanks to all of the readers out there who understand the importance of small publishers and the value of the work of the people that are with us here tonight. And in closing, I just want to remind everyone to stay tuned for our shortlist. It's going to be announced on March 5th. Our winner will be announced on March 19th. And I hope that you will follow us on social media and tell your friends about us, and go to your independent bookstore and buy every single one of these books and take them home and gobble them up. They are delicious and good, and they will make you feel like life is definitely worth living. And despite all the negativity, just forget the political scene that's happening later this year. Just read these books and just stick your head in the sand, and hopefully when you get to the end, the world will still be here, and we'll all still be kicking. So so thank you. You're wonderful, and I really am so appreciative.